My name is Jimmy Lewis.
My name is John Perkins.
And this is the Better Rider Podcast. This is a podcast we do at Jimmy Lewis Off-Road where we try to go over some tips and techniques to help you become a better rider. We like to introduce you to some of our staff, just talk about how we do things. And today we have with us John Perkins, who's better known as Big John.
I've been called once or twice.
And what we're going to talk about with John, of course, is how bigger or larger riders should ride, what the techniques are, what you have to do to adapt to fitting on, we'll call a smaller motorcycle.
They're all small at some point in my life, but yeah.
And I can relate to this too, not because I'm perfect at 5'10", 5'9.5", whatever I am, and maybe a little bit on the heavy side for that weight, according to some studies or surveys. I ride a lot of mini bikes, and we're talking like 125cc kids bikes, the 80cc
small
size,
wheels,
85 small wheels and stuff. And I've been doing this forever. I remember when I was racing, I felt I was too big for an 80. And I really wanted to get to 125, and I was really at that time too small for a 125. But what kid doesn't want to ride the big bikes? So I have some experience, and of course, you being how tall?
Right about 6'4".
6'4", and weight?
Oh boy, that's probably about 265 right now.
Wow.
Yeah. A true 265 too.
That's muscles. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Mostly.
So, and what were you when you were teaching with us? You were probably what, 220?
No, probably 240.
240. Okay.
I've pretty much always been overweight for everything.
Linebacker size.
Yeah.
So John used to teach with us. He got a regular job that unfortunately requires him to work on weekends.
Most weekends, unfortunately.
And so he can't come out and teach, although he does show up occasionally. So what we are going to go over is, and I know this just from a lot of just the I'll call it the chatter. Everybody that's a large rider thinks they need bar risers and they need to lower the pegs, and there's a lot of bike setup stuff. And what amazed me about you is back then, it was like, no, I don't want any of that. I don't like that.
Well, for years there, it was so easy to go the route of spend money to try and get more comfortable on a bike. But back then we were riding a lot of bikes. I was helping with the class a lot. So I had, not only did I have a lot of motorcycles at the time, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a lot of interest in different motorcycles. So at the time I had, 5 main bikes that I rode all the time that were all different brands. And at the end of the day, it was, as a teenager, early 20s, I couldn't afford to put lowering pegs and suspension and big bar risers. And I couldn't toy with every single bike. I just didn't have enough money for it. So I had to learn how to be okay with the bike being small. And in turn, it actually just kind of taught me how to ride a bike where I didn't like that type of stuff. I felt awkward being too far up in the air, or my heels would drag the ground because, of course, when you're this size, your feet get large as well.
Yep.
So you lower the pegs, now your feet drag the ground. You raise the bars, and now you have so much weight up in the air that it pendulums the bike awkward. And just kind of learning to work through how to ride a bike in a stock configuration, I think it made me a better rider at the end of the day, and it also kept me from spending frivolous amounts of money on stuff that was in turn useless for me.
Yeah, and then you could hop on any of the bikes that we had here. We do a lot of product testing with dirt bike tests, so we had stock bikes coming around, and we want to have bigger riders ride them, and we have small guys ride them as well, and this is just part of the testing that we do.
Yeah.
But it's because some bikes definitely fit better than other bikes.
Oh, for sure. Especially when you start kind of bouncing back and forth between bikes, and it's like, you get the Hondas that kind of have a bigger cockpit in the later years, and then you get the KTMs and Husqvarnas and stuff like that kind of cramp you up a little bit, and you can get away from a lot of that type of stuff by, again, throwing money at it, but you don't get the true kind of feel for a bike, I don't think. You lose a lot of input with the handlebar risers.
Yeah, it changed. They really spend a lot of time, and I'm still surprised that a manufacturer hasn't done what the mountain bike industry has done and make a small, medium, and large chassis. I think that I think a smaller brand could kind of do this, like a Beta or something could, and they kind of do it with their cross trainer. That's a smaller frame. It's that small.
It's percentage based downsized instead of, because you run it, like you said, you ride a lot of, pit bike style bikes.
Right.
And, they never, like the Honda 50, they never did a good job of downscaling that bike properly. They just kind of put two small same size tires on them and no offset in the forks, and the geometry was wrong. So they were kind of death traps. They hurt a lot of people that way when big guys got on them because they weren't scaled down properly. But Beta did fantastic with the X Trainer because they kind of took 10% off of it.
I could see where, like I said, I could see where a manufacturer could kind of stretch the frame out a little bit, just get it right and then do the geometry so that it does have a larger cockpit, a slightly taller seat. Seat to foot peg is higher. And then in reality, some of the adventure bikes, if you put a tall seat on them, they actually start fitting you because the handlebars are already farther forward because of that big tank.
Yeah, there's so much room up there to play with. But
so I think what we'll get to is like when you were riding the stock or the standard bike, what were some of the techniques? I know from observing them, what were some of the techniques you used to fit on the motorcycles?
Well, it's funny, we talk about in the school how much you have to use your legs for everything. And it's so much more important as a big guy because you have so much weight above the seat already as is. So when I squeeze a bike, I'm squeezing it with my calves. I'm squeezing it with my ankles. Like I can't use the stereotypical squeeze with your knees because my knees are above the tank.
Yeah, and
there's air to squeeze up there.
We've really gotten away from saying ever squeeze the bike. It's a good thing to do when there's a problem. Mm-hmm. That's so you don't get bucked or, so you can control it better. But, if you look at a taller guy, you stand up and your knees are 4 inches above the seat. Like try to squeeze. And
exactly.
The first thing we watch him do is we watch him bend at the knees and try to grip with the tank. Mm-hmm. And it's like, did that help?
Yeah. And so that was definitely something I kind of had to work on a lot was keeping positive control of the bike with my legs, because when you tower over the bike so far, it really, when you look straight down and your shoulders are in line with the handlebars, it's really easy to put all of that weight right on your handlebars because it's already there.
Yep.
So, which, as we know from experience, is a bad thing. You don't want to do that. So it kind of like emphasized that I have to hold onto the bike with my legs, and I had to kind of keep my core tight and rigid to keep my body from forcing itself down on top of the front end.
And so what you were doing is you were dropping your ankles. That
would get me lower.
Yeah, that would kind of help the bars come higher.
Yeah, so that would drop a little height off of me, which was easy and cheap.
Yeah, so easy and cheap, dropping the ankles, kind of swinging the ankles back down a little bit, and then also, instead of bending at the knees, bending at the core, at the hips.
Yep.
And then that's what he's talking about when he's talking about like looking down and seeing the triple clamps or the front number plate as opposed to looking down and seeing gas tank or seat.
Yeah.
When you look down, you're almost looking down at the front fender.
Yeah, and that was even going slow. That wasn't that doesn't account for body angle at speed type of stuff. That was just my stationary balanced position standing there.
Right.
And it was the only way you could do it. And
because if you stood straight up and let go of the handlebars and you'd reach for the bars and they're not anywhere near.
No way. No, they're not even.
how because when I do it, when I stand up, I get 2 to 3 inches maybe.
I'm not even feet. I'm not even within feet. Because you got to think so
because you're if you're standing straight up, and I'm putting my arms out. It like I said, there's probably 3 inches.
So I'm a big advocate for riding on the balls of your feet.
Yeah,
like very, very big on that. I don't like to ride in the middle of my foot at all. It hurts my foot, and also I feel a lot more dexterity out of my feet, especially in riding boots when I'm farther back on my feet.
Right,
but. Again, big feet, riding on the balls of your feet and dropping your heels. So that lowers me, but it also moves me back.
Yep.
So I'm not grabbing a bike nearly as far forward as, say, an average size rider, because now my calves are kind of farther back, which does limit me to the bikes that I really enjoy. Especially these days, as they start getting thinner towards the back of the bike, is I got to be careful with that. Like when Yamaha went to the backwards motor, I had issues with it because they had kind of bulged the silencer out a little bit there. Right. And that's right where I squeeze a bike. So now it wasn't uniform where I was squeezing. I had one where it would kick my right leg out.
Interesting.
So it kind of threw that bike where I really, really loved that bike, and it fit me good everywhere except my legs. It would cramp my calf because of how I had to hold on to the bike. Right. So even though I really liked that bike,
Yeah, so we're dropping the kind of dropping the ankle, so on the balls of the feet, and I ride in my arches, which is like kind of like I say, I kind of go to the balls of my feet when I really need to make the bike do something, and then I go back to the arches. That's the most balanced spot for me. But I don't like I said, you can't really afford to lose. You're going to gain that height.
It's a
and
lot.
It puts you up higher, yeah, and you think all that weight getting up higher. So then we're bending at the hips, not the knees, and then are you doing anything with the handlebars as far as are you gripping them different, or is it normal and just regular?
From everything I've seen over the years with you and Matt and all the other coaches and stuff, I ride from my arms down just like everyone else.
Okay,
I probably over grab a little bit more than most people because I'm so much farther. I tower over the bars instead of coming in on an angle type of thing. So I probably run my levers a little bit lower than most. Or a little bit lower than most,
like a regular,
riders,
because you're maybe up or, and all that stuff is just kind of personal, just the little settings. But the one thing that really can be changed and helps larger riders a ton, especially ones that weigh more, is getting the suspension set up.
Oh, suspension is such a huge deal in motorcycles, and especially because most average people are somewhere within the spectrum of stock suspension being usable.
Right.
It's close enough your average
once you get out of once you're 220 plus, I'm going to say, I can't see, because I noticed just for me going from 185 up to 200, I can tell.
Oh yeah,
it's still well within the range. Yeah. But if I took that next step, if I went 15 more pounds from that, I'm just going, wow, that's really going to be off, and I'm picky about it.
And the thing is, so obviously that your bike handles weird and does weird things, but it also affects how you stand on the bike and sit on the bike, because when you climb onto a bike and you're way overweight for it, and you sack the rear end down,
because you're generally farther back, so you got more weight back.
Well, because your legs are so long, you can only bend your legs so far, so it's hard to get comfortable up on the tank. I mean, you learn to deal with it, but when the bike is soft and it sags in the back and it kind of choppers the bike out a little bit, obviously we know that's going to make it push.
Yeah, even when you're sitting, and here's the thing: is when you're sitting in the middle towards the back of the seat, and it's even when you try to get. I mean, you can get forward, but you're not going to sit forward because you fold up like tent stakes.
Yeah, I can do it to turn, but I'm not going to do it for
all the time. So when you sit down, all your weight's in the back, and it's really taxing the suspension. So the suspension squats out. So number one, you lose all the plushness in the suspension. So number one, and then number two, the bike turns into a chopper.
So ride quality wise, you lose a lot, but where you also lose a lot is your endurance, because think about it. If the bike has now become sloped on the rear end, how do you hang on to it? If you're sitting on this thing, it's
the seat's no longer flat.
It's already trying to kind of slide you off the back. So now all of a sudden you find yourself holding on with your hands, because you're like, oh, I'm trying. It feels like you're doing a hill climb all the time.
But I don't think I ever saw you. I'm thinking back. I don't think I ever really saw you sitting down when we've been riding. No. All the times we've been riding,
it's horrible.
I've never seen you sit down.
Even if I sit towards the back of the seat, my legs are still at 90 degrees or acute. There's no, they're not.
Yeah. So what we're talking about suspension is you have to get the suspension sprung for you, and it's really critical in the rear. And then the problem is that the suspension is balanced, and as you go up in the rear, you're going to need to stiffen the front because it'll start pushing down more in the front. And this is something that there's charts for. There's spring rate charts. There's a lot of information about how to do it properly. But some people can just throw springs on it. But you got to remember the rebound dampening starts going out the window when you start throwing springs at it. Especially once you've gone up about 2 rates, your clickers aren't going to do the job they need to do to slow that down.
Springs will get you tenfold.
Yeah,
but the valving will get you that last the bit that truly makes a difference.
Right.
Like you'll get that massive jump where you go, oh my goodness, this bike feels like a totally new machine. It feels like I feel comfortable on it. It feels better. It's not doing weird stuff anymore. But it's that valving that really kind of puts you over the toe of really good handling bike.
So we're going to get into to bar risers in a minute, which I'm not a big fan of, and you weren't, and you changed a little bit, and I totally agree with you, by the way. So we're going to hit that. But in the importance of things, bar risers or suspension,
Oh, suspension.
Okay.
Suspension, way more money. It's the most expensive thing you will ever do to your motorcycle. Right?
Yeah.
It is, as far as a bolt-on.
Yeah.
It is the most expensive thing, and it is by far the first thing you should do.
Yeah.
And if it's the only thing you can do, it should be the only thing you do.
So it's, and most bikes is probably $1,500 to get your suspension sprung and valved.
And that's dialed. That's set up, ready to go.
Right.
But even if you're just a big guy, and so like back to the suspension thing. So obviously there's the suspension rate. So you've got the amount of that it'll hold up, and say you're a bigger guy, let's say 240 pounds. Well, there's a reason that when you do the calculations, or if you go to a suspension shop, they ask you how tall you are, because not only does the weight matter, but also your height matters, because you got to think I'm penduluming.
And that's what I say. When you sit down, you're sitting down on the back of the
or
bike.
even when I'm standing up.
Yeah, you can stand up and throw a whole bunch of weight up over the front.
I can move weight like you cannot.
Right.
So that all kind of factors in on the, you can be undersprung a little bit, but if you're tall, you can be undersprung a lot.
Yeah. And you can make it worse, or you can move your body around and make some things better, but it really does make a difference, especially when you're even, tall, light guys have this pendulum effect.
Yeah.
But heavy guys really attacks the suspension. So now let's get into the bar risers. And we were talking a few minutes ago, you brought up that you said now that you're not riding as much, you start noticing your core getting tired when you're in your kind of standing position a lot.
Yep, because it's funny, as a tall guy, your casual, comfortable standing position tends to look a lot more attack position for most.
Right.
Because of how you have to stand. Because I'm not going to give up my legs for anything, because that's my 100%. That's what's holding me on. That's what's holding me up.
And you don't want to tire them out by doing a squat. You're not going to squat down on the bike. You're standing up.
If I start squatting on that thing, I mean,
this goes for anybody. You don't want to bend at the knees. You want to bend at the hips.
Yeah. You want to be comfortable in that part down. There's your strongest muscles, your longest lasting muscles, but also the ones you can burn out the fastest.
Right.
But if you want to have a good, long, fun riding day, you cannot afford to give those up. You're going to give up control. You're going to give up comfort, and you're just going to have a rough time.
Okay. So you've gone to bar risers. Explain why.
So I've gone to bar risers. And anyone who's ever taken a class with me knows my take on bar risers.
Well, you said you hated them.
I have hated them for my whole life. They were, like I said, they didn't work in my world. Well, now fast forward 10 years or so, I'm older. I'm fatter.
6 years.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, 6 years. 6 years since you've been riding a lot.
I don't know about that.
Not 10.
Oh, since I've been not riding a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so, I didn't relate that well to people, even though I could talk to them and talk them through it and help people understand it. But I didn't relate that well to it because I rode every other day.
Yes.
I rode several times a week for a long time, and my muscles were, conditioned to do what I was doing. It was how I stood on a bike, how I functioned on a bike. Well, fast forward now, and I ride every other month if I'm lucky, type of thing. So I've lost a lot of that conditioning, and I can't stand in that position anymore. My legs,
all day.
In order for me to get my legs comfortable, I have to be tense and tight in the stomach, and I have to be tight in the upper back.
We say tight in the core, yeah.
Tight in the core, yes. And so now I've risen my bars a little bit. Still very, very, very little rise.
Yeah,
like
not the 3 inches.
No.
Yeah, but a little. And it makes a big difference.
I have a 1/2 inch rise on both of my bikes right now.
Uh-huh.
And I love it.
Yeah.
It's not enough to give up control, like the big giant 4-inch risers type thing that
put you back,
push you in weird positions.
They don't allow you to get forward, and they push you back most of the time. So when John explained this to me, when he said, "Hey, I'm out of condition and stuff like that," and what was the one thing I said? I said, "What's the biggest difference between you riding then and now?"
Oh, speed.
The speed you're going.
Speed.
And you think about it, when the more aggressive you go and the more forward you are, there's your bar height. You're basically riding now at a speed that's a 1/2 inch farther back. You're getting into old man speed.
I've got 2 kids. It's it happens,
Yeah.
But I like that because I feel like now I'm going to have a much better time talking to people about taller riders
because you can understand, you understand a little
well, now I understand both sides of it instead of being the young guy that really just understood that this works.
And by talking to you about this, knowing how you were, anti-bar riser guy, and I'm like, okay, well, at least there's one tall guy in the world that agrees with me. but don't get me wrong, I jokingly say I hate bar risers. I don't hate bar risers. I hate it when people go instantly to the 3-inch tall bar risers. And there are some and most of my adventure bikes have slightly taller or have a bar riser of some sort on them because they're also designed to be ridden sitting down. Yep. And when I stand up, all of a sudden, I can't reach the bars.
They're flat, they're low, they have no sweep, so they tend to be
they're not in the right position. So I do use bar risers, but I want you to get them for the right reason, and it's not because you're tall. It's because I want you to get them because it's going to put you in the proper body position.
Exactly. And
most people get them, and then they're in this weird, awkward, we call it pelvis forward, upright position where if they can't even anticipate what's going to, if they turn the throttle, they fall off the back of the motorcycle. They can't even fall into the motorcycle.
And that's the thing, is it's hard because especially if you go to the internet and you look up riding tips, right? You're only ever going to get enough to mess you up. You're never going to get the full
Remember,
thing.
This is an internet show and it's for free.
Oh, this is fair, but I do know of a great class you could take that would iron out a lot of these issues. But it's
and we always tell people it's like, come and take the class, then start working on the ergonomics.
And there's money to spend. There's always money to spend on motorcycles. You can find it anywhere and everywhere you want, but just try your best. And I tell everyone this is try your best to figure out what you're doing, why you're doing, and how it's going to affect you.
One thing at a time.
One thing at a time. Because we've had people in the past that show up that are towering over me, 6'9", just monster people, and you tell them, hey, you need to stand upright. That way, it's taking load off of your legs, so your legs last longer. So they get the handlebar risers that are 4 inches, and then they get the CR high bends that add another 2 inches, and the next thing you know, they're standing there, and it's almost comical looking because they're back straight with their hips and their legs, and they're standing straight up and down on a motorcycle. Yeah. But they can't do anything from that. They give it a little bit of gas, they fall off the back.
And when they're standing up in they're 9 feet tall.
Exactly.
They're way up there.
You get a little bit of exhaust or a little bit of engine brake on a 4-stroke, and it throws them over the handlebars. And they're balanced for going 0 miles an hour.
Right. But we're very rarely riding it.
It just doesn't happen.
That's why when you stand up on your bike in the shop and they put it on a stand, you say, "Oh, look, your bars are short." It's like, well, I don't ride like this. And as you start riding faster, you do tend to start leaning. As you accelerate harder, you lean into it. I don't even think you don't really lean in it. You fall into it.
You fall into it, and the bike
catches you back up.
A little of that comes from wind. A little bit of it comes from momentum and the power of the bike, pushing underneath you.
And generally, when you're going that speed, you don't need to be hanging onto the handlebars because they're almost in your lap. The bike you're steering with your feet, and that's the thing is people start steering the bike with the handlebars, and when it feels like your hands are down underneath you, like this, you don't feel like you have any strength. It's like you don't, and you're not going to get to because you're not going to need it. But,
and that was the thing with my pre-bar riser days is I was learning that there was definitely positions and times where it was unfavorable to have really low bars, to have stock height bars. And it would have been in like the super slow technical sections where, maybe I had to bend a little bit more. I was bending more at the hips to get down to the bars to keep weight off of them to do really technical stuff. Right. But it was worth the trade-off for what I was getting in the end.
Okay. And so the next thing for a tall guy that doesn't sit down, tall seats.
I don't like them. I still don't like them. I still don't like them.
I'm the short guy that likes tall seats. Like, oh, you ought to ride my Tenere.
Yeah.
By the way, I got a tall. It's nice.
So it's funny. I had a KTM 530 a while back, and it's the only bike I've ever had with a tall seat on it, and I could not stand it. It was a dual sport. It had a license plate on it. I rode it on the street, and I loved it on the street because it was tall and it didn't bend my knees nearly as much.
Right.
But it was, and maybe it was me not giving it a chance to learn it, but I would go to ride it aggressively because it was still a KTM. It was still a dirt bike. And I would go to ride it aggressively off road, and I would go to like lay it into a corner, and I felt like I couldn't move on the bike.
Down into the pocket.
Yeah, it made me feel like I was riding a pit bike almost.
Right.
Like it made the bike feel smaller, even though I know the idea of it was to try and make the bike feel bigger or bigger for, a big guy. And all it did was make the cockpit feel smaller. It pushed me forward a little bit because now my knees were still kind of wanting to be in the same position, but it slid me forward a little bit on the seat, and it picked me up. Like I almost felt like my lap was on top of the handlebars.
There's some stuff in seats now, like they have gull wings. They're like these seats that have these things you can grip on them. And some of the seat concept seats have this, kind of it's the fat part where you're supposed to sit on it,
those
but it's just you're able to kind of grip them.
Yeah.
So there's I run the tall seats on my adventure bikes because they're generally they try to make them low for low people, small people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't sit down when I'm turning. I rarely sit down when I ride it at all, except when I'm cruising. And then I want that comfortable tall seat that my legs don't bend so much on. And one other thing I wanted, and we're gonna, like we always do in the show, we're gonna give you a tip, a free tip.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're gonna get to give.
Well, I get to give a tip.
Yeah. But the other question was, it's real easy for you to put your feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So us small people that can't reach the ground, we can't touch. You can put both feet down, but you don't do that very often.
No.
It starts the crash.
But believe it or not, that wasn't instinctive. That is, of all the things that I've had to learn and relearn riding motorcycles, and then in turn in the future riding motorcycles properly,
right,
was that was the single hardest thing for me to learn or unlearn.
The bad habit of
stop putting because my whole life, I mean, it's not like I became this size when I was an adult. I was always a big guy, a big kid. And so it didn't matter what I was riding. I could put both feet on the ground and I could do it easily. So that was something I had to make second nature, was to never put both feet on the ground. Don't do it. It's bad. You give up everything.
Right. You give up all the bike control. And I always say that's when you've begun the crash, and when you practice it all the time, or you get comfortable doing it. Mm-hmm. And especially we tell the tall guys, I know you can do it, just don't. Because, if you're on an adventure bike, the legs come out, the one that hits the ground first gets kicked back, and next thing you know, it's underneath the pannier. Yep. Bad times. On the dirt bikes, you see the rudders come out, and then like, how are you controlling that thing?
You're not. It's going to do whatever it wants with you.
And how are you going to get off of it?
Yep.
You're not going to eject by doing a push up off the handlebars.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, you can have all the technique in the world. I've watched you do it time and time again, but sometimes. Tell me I'm doing something I'm
wrong.
not saying this is a proper riding technique.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need a little gumption to make it do what you couldn't make it do. We're not perfect.
Right.
Well, you might be. I'm not perfect. So when something goes wrong, sometimes I have to put that, 100% of John into it and make it do what I want it to do. It's not the right way to do it. It's not the way but it is the way to keep me from hitting the ground sometimes. Yep. You have to have that backup
and
just in case.
The best place to put that is through the foot pegs.
It's certainly not on the ground.
Nope. And
the ground's never going to help.
You're not going to get that much out. I mean, the handlebars are great to push, tug, pull, twist, do it when you need to. But if you're doing it all the time and then you need to, what are you going to do? And generally, I always say, watch all the videos. Watch the videos. When the legs come off, the crash begins. And I just saw a great one the other day. We need to get these things and put them in a reel and go break. We'll do the crash breakdown, and it always starts with the feet come off the foot pegs and stuff happens.
So years ago, story time with John. Years ago, we were on the dry lake bed during a class, and it was perfect conditions. It had rained the night before. The dry lake bed was tacky. It was not dusty. It was just hero dry lake dirt, and I was riding the 1190, and we're kind of simmering down, getting ready to go back for lunch. And I'm bunny hopping this 1190 over a propane cylinder, like a small propane cylinder.
Right.
And I remember you coming up to me and you went, "Can you do that in front of the class?" And I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not? But everything was perfect. It was like my technique was working good, and the dirt was perfect.
Having a good day, on day.
It was just an on day. And I go to do it in front of the class, and I can't do it. And it's like I had churned up enough of the dirt around it that it was no longer giving me that 100% traction. Yeah. I was getting like 99, and it just wasn't enough. And I quickly kind of caught myself, and I was like, my technique was failing. So as the percentage of technique went down, the percentage of John's strength went up. And I just kind of started trying to muster it up. And I'm like, I'll just pick this bike up. I'll just do it myself. And it never worked. It never worked one more time. As soon as everyone was watching me, I never did it again.
Yeah, but you can do it all day long on a small dirt bike. I've seen you because you can crush a small dirt bike and just the spring and the suspension. I've seen you grab it with your feet and give it a that doesn't work it doesn't work for me on adventure bikes. It's all technique and finesse. Finesse and technique, and if you have the muscles, you can use them, but sometimes not.
But so that almost leads back to the just because you can put both your feet on the ground thing. It works in some scenarios, but if you rely on it in all scenarios, it's never going to work for you.
Right.
It's just the give and take is never going to be enough.
Okay, so we're going to put you on the spot here. If you had to tell other tall riders out there, what is one tip or technique that will help anybody that's tall?
Tip or technique oh man, you put me on I wasn't ready for this.
I thought we talked about it. I think it's
Did we?
Before the show, I said you're going to give the tall rider tip.
I know, and I've got a lot of tall rider tip. I've been a tall rider tip my whole life.
What do you think what's the most beneficial thing?
It's foot positioning. It's foot positioning all day for me because it's the building block for everything that comes afterwards. Because it's learning to move your foot where it's comfortable for you, where you can still get to the controls, where you're toe in, because you see a lot of big riders, they always get toe out. Right. And the problem with that is that when you start adding inches to the width of your motorcycle, you want to see a bad day, catch your foot toed out on a rut and watch it rip your knee off. That is terrifying to me. So I've always been a toe in guy.
You're definitely toe in.
Yep, I'm toe in. I'm heels dropped, heels back, and that kind of just it sets me up for a good building block going up from there. The good thing about that
tip is it works for all riders, but big riders just pay close attention to your feet. So, hey, if you have any questions about any of the stuff you've heard, leave them in the comments. Reach out to us at jimmylewisoffroad.com, and we will get back and answer them. If you have really good questions, we'll make a whole damn episode about it.
Might as well.
Trying to explain some of these techniques. You can join us on one of our live classes out here in Pahrump, Nevada, and we also have online schools. Right now, specifically, we have our beginner online training that you can register for on the website. It's a video series, and if you haven't ever touched a motorcycle or you want to refresh yourself with the techniques that are the great foundation to start with, check that out. It's very inexpensive, and I guarantee you're going to learn a whole bunch. So for John Perkins, this is Jimmy Lewis and producer Matt over here.
Go, Matt.
We'll see you out in the trail. Cheers.
Have a good one.